Greetings and salutations, my fellow Kerbinauts. With the release of the first science update for Kerbal Space Program 2, we have finally been given the pieces we need to begin to piece together the clues left for us by the developers. The strange monuments which had been placed throughout the Kerbaler system since the initial release of the game did seem to hint at some kind of lore, but I did not expect them to become the main focus of KSP2's story. But it is clear now that our journey outside the Kerbaler system will have much more of a purpose than simple exploration. In fact, we may be stepping into a much more dangerous situation than we know. In order to be as prepared as possible, it is imperative that we take the time to discuss what we've learned so far. Please note that this video will contain spoilers for the current story of Kerbal Space Program 2. If you do not wish to be spoiled, please consider experiencing the story yourself before watching this video. If you enjoy this kind of content, please let me know by liking the video or even subscribing if you feel so inclined. This content is fun for me to make, and I would love to continue making it into the future. But, with all this out of the way, let's get to the video. The very first signal that we receive is located on the Mun. Upon arriving at the location of the signal, we find a very large golden arch sticking out of the ground. The Mun rocks, which had previously encased the artifact back in KSP1, are scattered about the area. At the top of the arch, we see several differently colored circles. On top of this, the sides of the arch appear to have a rather strange squiggle pattern on them. Now it is very clear to me that the circles on top clearly represent the planets of the Kerbaler system and their moons. But this tells us nothing about why such an object would be in this location, or what the patterns on the side represent. However, we would not be left in our confusion for much longer. Not long after discovering this Mun Arch, we began to receive a signal from Minmus. However, the signal was too weak to make any kind of message out from it, so we are tasked with putting a relay probe in orbit around Minmus to improve the strength of the signal. Upon completing this task, we are able to determine what the message says. It simply says, "Welcome, younger sibling." As confirmed by Dr. Kerry Kerman, this is proof of another advanced civilization out there. It would appear that whoever these beings are, they are welcoming us to the stars with open arms. But the most important takeaway from this short message is the word sibling. Perhaps such a word could be purely figurative. But if we do take its meaning literally, it would mean that this species and ourselves are related. If it is true that we are genetically related to the people of an advanced alien civilization, this would change everything we know about our history and ourselves. So we decided to continue pursuing these signals in an effort to see what might be revealed. This led us to finding a strange statue on the surface of Minmus. It looks very much like a Kerbal, but its mouth appears to be a set of tentacles. On top of this odd Kerbal has a massive cyan crystal atop its head. The statue is surrounded by 6 spheres which are all balanced atop obelisks. Finally, the ground upon which the statue stands appears to have a design carved into it. This design appears to show 2 celestial bodies orbiting the statue. This statue, in my view, gives us more questions than answers. What is this Kerbal-looking creature? Could it perhaps be our siblings or something else? What do the spheres represent? What does the design on the ground represent? What is up with the giant crystal? Unfortunately, we do not know if there were any new signals originating from this discovery because Kerry appeared to have a momentary spell of dementia during the reading of our mission debrief. The only option we had was to forge ahead. Our quest for knowledge eventually brought us to the planet Duna, where we would find a monument which finally helped us piece things together. This particular monument appears to depict some kind of a tree being with the face of this creature at the bottom of the tree trunk. But it is when we look above the head that we find the most important clue. We see that there are 4 branches on this tree, 2 of which have survived and 2 have been destroyed. One of the surviving branches depicts the tentacle mouth Kerbal we had seen on Minmus, which I will refer to as a Squirble from here on out, and the rightmost surviving branch depicts a Kerbal. The Kerbal and the Squirble, and also one of the creatures we cannot see, are standing on top of blue orbs very similar to the ones at the Minmus Monument. We see the Squirble and the Kerbal looking up at a much larger blue orb at the top, with longing expressions. This monument's symbolism appears to be in line with the idea of us being a younger sibling. We come from the same trunk, but the Squirble is at a higher elevation than the Kerbal. But more importantly, this monument also seems to confirm that we have two other siblings. However, due to the unfortunate wear and tear of this monument, we do not know what these siblings would have looked like. In response to this groundbreaking discovery, Carrie Kerman reached out to her old friend Levi at the Institute of Old Stuff to see if there was anything in the historical record which seemed to relate to this. This was his reply. My dearest Carrie, it seems fate and destiny have brought us together again. I have regretted not telling you how I felt for all these years. We were able to locate a reference from a discontinued cereal brand called Kerbinos. Supposedly it was too salty. Kerbina was the cereal's mascot, and she was spun into a middling children's show. In episode 1, the cereal goddess Kerbina is born as a beam of light into the dark depths of the ocean. Then, one day, two children appear. Kerbina takes those little Kerbals on ocean adventures, but she warns them that going on land means she can't protect them. Eventually, the children wander off to explore the land, never to be seen again. The rest of the season is all product placements. Perhaps this story has its origins in whatever history was lost here. However, it seems strange that this statue appears to depict 4 children, whereas the story depicts only 2. Details of a story can change over time, especially if such a story was passed down through the oral tradition. However, because of this, we need to find more evidence of a connection between Kerbina and the statue before making any final conclusions. Finally, towards the end of our journey, we received a final signal originating from a location near Jewel. The vast distance required us to send a very powerful communications probe in order to decode the message. So, being the curious beings that we are, we sent a probe immediately. The message we heard was this. Honor for Gorjah, the oldest one. The dreaming tree that bears the fruit of the world, whose unmaking eyes watch over the tetrad, and whose roots are watered with knowledge. The fact that this Gorjah character is described as a tree would suggest that they are what the Duna Monument is depicting. This is further corroborated by the fact that Gorjah watches over the tetrad, since there were 4 branches on the tree. And, if the tree roots are watered with knowledge, perhaps that would explain our very curious nature. Also, perhaps this is proof against the idea of the Kerbina story having any importance. After receiving this message, Carrie once again inquired with her friend Levi of the Institute of Old Stuff. He was able to dig up the following text from a very strange source, a Fertilizer commercial. It's Gorjah, Gorjah, the sentient tree at the center of the world. It's Gorjah, Gorjah, makes your plants grow, but only 4 kinds. It's Gorjah. Carrie then paraphrases the remainder of it. The whole jingle is about 20 minutes. It's about how Gorjah grows tall to keep the 4 fruits safe, but the growing takes a lot out of him. While he's sleeping, the fruit reaches up to the heavens and then floats away. So Gorjah, like Kerbina, seems to be some kind of a parental figure that watches over their children until the children eventually leave the safety of their care. This may be the evidence we needed to connect Kerbina to Gorjah. Also, this is starting to get rather ominous. It would seem that there is some connection between these stories and these monuments that we've found, and if these stories are true, whatever danger Gorjah/Kerbina was protecting us from may be a real thing, just like the monuments were a real thing. But we could not let this fear get the better of us, my fellow Kerbinauts. Using our probe, we were able to narrow down the source of the signal to Tylo, Jewel's largest moon. Upon landing on Tylo, we found the final monument. It depicted a very heavy Squirble that appeared to be balancing itself upon many rocks. It held 2 orbs in its hand, which appear to represent stars, one of which is Kerbal, and the other is currently unknown to Kerbalkind. When we found this monument, all of the other signals ceased immediately, and they left us with only this long message. Joyous salutations, younger sibling. You have grown upward. We are feeling the emotion of pride. To have made it this far, you must be ready for something meatier. Jubilant wheezing. Humorous diversion is the best pharmaceutical. This belief, like many others, we share. Come find us where Kerbal does not shine. We shall be waiting. Good luck. And this is where they leave us for now. If we want the answers, we will have no choice but to leave the comfort of our home solar system. But in the meantime, we can only use what we've been given to try to figure out the truth. In my view, Kerbina and Gorjah are the same being, just at different times. I believe that this being, whoever they are, created 4 different species on a single homeworld. They sought to protect these 4 species from some kind of danger that existed out in the darkness of space. 2 of the 4 species decided to go against the wishes of their protector and venture out into space. However, this danger eventually found them and destroyed their civilizations. The remaining 2 species were the Kerbals and the Kerbals. Gorjah/Kerbina sought to prevent them from meeting the same fate as their siblings. Gorjah/Kerbina tried to satiate their desires for exploration by taking them on adventures on some mysterious home planet. But eventually, they wanted to venture out into the stars as well. However, they eventually found that same danger that destroyed their siblings. Now you may want to ask what makes me think there is some danger out there. While it is true that the stories never mention any kind of danger, and the lost branches on the Duna Monument could have just been simple wear and tear over time, I have one piece of evidence that leads me to believe it was a specific danger. The Kraken. Or perhaps the Krakens. This image was found within the pre-release videos for the game. It clearly depicts a Kraken destroying a spacecraft. Initially, this is all we were given, and it could have been written off as simple jokes from the developers. But eventually, the whole image was revealed, and what we find at the bottom of this image is none other than our 2 surviving species, a Squirble and a Kerbal. The much smaller Kerbal appears to be reaching out for a hug, and the Squirble appears to be rejecting this hug. So, returning to our theory with this newfound information, I believe that these 2 species ran into the Krakens, and the Squirbles wanted to protect the Kerbals from danger. They found a suitable planet and left the Kerbals there without any technology so as to hide them from the Krakens. They could only hope that the Kerbals would one day rediscover the technology that had been lost and be able to explore a safe universe. But unfortunately, this is where the trail runs cold. All we can do from here is speculate. Perhaps the Squirbles fought a war with the Krakens and won. This would certainly explain why we haven't run into any of them during our journeys into space. At least in a literal sense. This particular avenue of speculation may be further evidenced by a certain discoverable on Bob, which I intend to discuss in a later video. However, we cannot ignore the much darker possibilities here. Perhaps the Squirbles have joined the Krakens, and they're luring us into a trap. Or perhaps the Krakens won the war, and now they're deceiving us into leaving our safe haven. Or, of course, perhaps we're nowhere near the truth. Unfortunately, we just don't have enough information at this point to make a solid determination. But we must not give up. We may not know the answers, my fellow Kerbinauts, but that is only more reason to explore. Let us bravely venture out into the cosmos until our questions are answered. See you next time. Hey everybody, thank you so much for making it to the end of this video. I hope you enjoyed the format of this, where I kind of pretended to be a Kerbal, and I truly would like to do more of these in the future. As of right now, I'm thinking I might make some shorter lore videos where I just go to each individual celestial body and talk about what's there, what it's made of, potential history of it, some of the discoverables. And I think I could probably do that on a monthly basis. If you want to see more content like this coming from me, please let me know by dropping a like, commenting, or even subscribing if you feel so inclined. And yeah, thank you very much. I'll see you around.